This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are building the future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardaville, and everybody loves a small town kid done good story. And my guest today has one of those. ANN CLOYD grew up in a tiny, tiny town in Texas, but went on to have a remarkable career in accounting and consulting, mainly with PwC. And she's here to talk about that journey and what inspired her to write the book, The Audacity to Wonder. ANN, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Joe, I am very well, thank you. I appreciate you making the time to do this, inviting me on your show.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. And let me tell you, one of the things I love about your book is the title, because the word wonder. And I don't want to get, obviously, it's not all about wonder, but I always feel that wonder is the one thing we all kind of lose as we get older. And when people say, I'm dying inside, they joke around. I think what dies inside is wonder. And that leads to relationship breakups, because you lose that sense of wonder in your partner. At work, you lose your sense of purpose and wonder in that. So tell me about wonder and what wonder means to you.
It's interesting because the title came after the book was finished. So it wasn't going into it saying this is what it's going to be, but having gone through that whole process of writing the book and trying to capture how I got here and why I got here. And working with some of the fabulous people with my publisher, we were just brainstorming one day about what a title should be. And that's how we came up with it. And that's how it was, just talking through and realizing wonder. That's what it is. I've just never lost that sense of, being awestruck by the world.
That's so cool. And so I'm speaking to you from your lovely Manhattan apartment, but you grew up in Mart, Texas, if I got the pronunciation correct.
You got it right. I'm impressed. You got the pronunciation of both my last name and where I grew up correct, and not everybody does.
Nice. All right. So what is Mart, Texas like? Because as Northerners, we kind of have this attitude of, oh boy, big red state, everybody's got guns. It fill in the stereotype you wish. But what is Mart, Texas like?
Well, now you have to understand, you will get my perspective of Mart, Texas, that goes back to when I was still there. So
Okay.
I left many, many, many years ago and
Okay.
have not been back. But it would be sort of like small town, right? Where when I think back of it, I think back of everybody being interested in what everybody else was doing. So to your point, one of the things I love about Manhattan is there's a certain sense of anonymity to living in the city, where you can actually be connected with people but still be anonymous. I went to, and it'd be interesting because I don't know how big Mart High School is now, but when I was there, my graduating class, I think, was 47 people. The not, I can't say 100%, but probably the substantial majority of the people I graduated with, we went to school together for 12 years, right? So the same people that were in my first grade class were probably in my graduating class. I don't know. I've actually not kept up with anybody that's in, and I'm not a Facebook person. So, I don't know. But I would guess the majority probably still live very close to where they are. Very much a football school. So when I was there, I believe while I was either in high school or junior high, that we won the state football championship in our division, which in Texas is a really big deal. Um, and it was just, I, in many respects, felt like I was always a minority there, because it is that part of Texas, even at that time. Now, you have to remember, at one point, Texas, Lyndon Johnson was from Texas, right? So, and that was in my lifetime, but it's very much it's just such a different place that I'm not sure I ever felt like I really belonged in. I can't, I was, when I said as a minority, I was raised Catholic.
Hmm.
So, and that was very much not what that part of the state was. So your visions of some of the, the Southern Baptist, the evangelical. That was much more the area I grew up in, and I can remember my father being when friends would say, "Do you wanna go to summer Bible class with us?" And my father, as a devout Catholic, would be quite troubled by that.
Yeah. That's so funny. And in the book you describe feeling different. Was it all derived from religion and having that Catholic background? Was that where the difference started?
No. No. No, it was everything. It was everything. I was raised by grandparents, so my mother left. I never knew my mom, really. She left when I was an infant. I don't know why. She died when I was still very young. Nobody talked about it. So not only was I of a different religion, I was being raised by grandparents. And and now I can look and they were wonderful people, and I can look back and see, I mean, what a labor of love, right? I mean, to take on a child. I mean, I don't have children, but to take on a child when you're in your late 50s and essentially raise that child until it's only as you get older that you're thinking, wow, where did that energy come from? But as a kid, you just don't want to be different. Right? You just don't wanna be that person who doesn't have parents of the same age that everybody else is. It's like, well, and I think that's probably still true today, right? When you look at social media and everything.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, your book may fall under the business book category, but I get the feeling that this is not a very businessy book.
No.
You talk a lot about your life and you're very open about it. So I mean, you even talk about marriages, but I want to know, you mentioned this idea of like not belonging. At what point in your life did you feel that, oh, I found my place?
Ultimately, it came in stages. So when I moved from Waco to Dallas, it was like, "Oh, wow, this is better," right? I mean, this is different. I'm better in a big city. And it changed jobs along the way. When I moved from Texas to California, for me, that was, again, no criticism of, it's just a fresh breath of fresh air for me because I felt so much comfortable. And even the firm that I was with, when suddenly I can walk down the hall and I see that, wow, there's, different people here. And there was a group within the firm that was a Japanese business group. So I could walk down the hall and hear people speaking Japanese. It's like, oh, this is really a great thing. As the firm grew and changed, I mean, I think I fit in more and more, and then ultimately, there's never been a place better for me than Manhattan. That was like when it's and I had friends that when I left, it's not the place in California, but when I left California, I would talk about how wonderful Manhattan was for me, and it was just easy, and that is like the most comfortable I have ever been anywhere in my life is here in this big city.
That's awesome. That's great. That's great to hear. And now let's get into the businessy side, the career side. I mean, you came
Sure.
up in a very male dominated industry. So take us back to those early days and what was like when, you hear these stories now. Luckily, they're few and far between, but back then it was pretty commonplace for there to be 9 men and 1 woman, or 9 white men and one person of color. So what was it like back then? Well, like what was your job early on? What were you doing?
So from the time so I and when I graduated from Baylor, studied accounting, and from my spent virtually my entire career, first career within the accounting profession, or I'd call it the consulting profession, because it certainly has changed and ending up with a fabulous firm like PwC. I mean, the firm does a lot of different things, and I had the privilege of doing a lot of different things. But to your point, Joe, I can remember so I retired from PwC in 2015. I can remember within a very, very few years of my retiring still being the only woman in the room,
Wow.
right? And I worked and that's not I mean, again, I am very proud of that firm and what they did, but I spent most of my career that way. I never thought about it so much, right? I mean, to me, I was just much more focused on doing what I need to do. In retrospect, for better or for worse, I realized that I must have had some pretty good instincts and did things not because it was a conscious thought. And I'll give you a great example, if I may. There was once when I was running a business unit, and we had an incredibly talented young African American man, Black man, resign. And he was a star performer. And I remember was surprised he left. He was somebody that was on a great career path. And the person who was running HR for me, when she interviewed him, he made the comment that he felt uncomfortable. I don't know if see the word discriminated, but he didn't feel like he was accepted, belonged, or whatever. And I was stunned because this was in Southern California. I saw none of that. And so we had just hired a young woman in recruiting who also happened to be Black. And I invited her into my office and I said, you're new here. I need you to share with me if there's something going on that I'm not seeing. Because I realized that sometimes you see what you want to see. And I said, is there some type of something, discrimination, whatever word you want to use going on that I don't know about? And she said, well, Marianne, she said, not in the way that you would think of it, where it's overt. But she said in subtle ways, sure. And she gave an example, and she gave the example of her husband, and I forget where he worked, but who was also Black. And she said, so if he's standing around, he's not a golfer, and all the guys around him are talking about being at the club that weekend where they played golf, by virtue of the fact that that's not the world you came from, you don't feel included. And what I realized that I did instinctively in retrospect was, first off, I knew there were people that would never include me. I had a man once tell me that I was just taking a job that belonged to some deserving man. I'm like, okay, sorry you feel that way, but anyway, but he did. And so somehow I knew somebody like that would never be, forget advocate, whatever. But I found a way to make it easy for them, right? So I am not a golfer. But if I'm going to be in a meeting or around people where I know there are a lot of golfers, I can find a way. I will make sure that I am informed enough, that I know what's going on, so I made it easy for them to talk to me. And how did I know to do that? I don't know. I really don't know. And it's only in retrospect that I realized that that's what I did.
Hmm. Now, you did have some mentorship along the way, and you talk about Bernie in the book. Tell me about Bernie's impact on your career.
So Bernie was, so that was not a business impact. Well, it was. It was indirectly. Bernie was, believe it or not, a psychiatrist that I saw in Waco, Texas. So was there with me when I escaped from Waco to Dallas. And from a very different background. He was, again, in Waco, but he was Jewish and had moved there from New York. And I think that he may have been the first person I ever talked to who I felt saw me for who I was, even when I couldn't see myself for who I was, and provided encouragement that was obviously not just on a personal side, but also on a business side. And if I ever had a mentor, and from a business standpoint, it was also someone in Texas who was an amazing man by the name of Phil, who I met when I was interviewing, when I graduated from Baylor, and who I kept in touch with, not necessarily regularly, but, literally almost until the day he died. And in retrospect, owe him so, so much. In fact, Joe, when you say that, it brings up, I was having lunch with a friend one day this week, and she is also retired from her first. She was had major corporate positions. We're talking about the impact that people have had on our lives, or the impact we might have on other people's lives. And she told a story of, like, she said, and it was somebody, she said, I don't know that he will ever know what he did for me, but it was like, she said, I was working on a project. It was like one of, first major corporate position. And she said, I had done something, it was a project that did not go well. Let's just say that. And that happens to all of us. And she said she remembers being in this person's office and saying, apologizing for things going bad. And his comment was, you need to believe in yourself. I believe in you. And she says to this day, he probably has no idea what those words meant to her. And I can go back, so whether it was Bernie, my psychiatrist, or whether it was Phil in the business world, just I mean, it's like just a few things. And some of those things, Joe, can also be the so I always used to tell people that were working for me, sometimes you can learn as much from a bad mentor as you can from a good one.
Totally. No, I absolutely. I mean, my life. I go back and I'm like, I have like this mental checklist of folks I work with that were like legendary in their field. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do like, yeah, I'll take the good stuff,
Exactly.
but not the bad stuff.
Exactly. And that probably propelled you as far as even some of the good things you could say that, yes, that's what I want to emulate, or I hope I always do that.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm curious now that this shoe's on the other foot, pardon the phrase, but that like as your role as a mentor to other people, has it been intentional or unintentional? Because I know this idea of mentorship has kind of exploded over the last decade or so. And the idea that a mentorship is really not just a one-way street, it's a two-way street, like what the mentor could learn from the mentee and all that other stuff as well. But what's been your tack, or because it sounds like, without putting words in your mouth, you were not very self-aware as a younger person, but you seem to be more self-aware now. So how does that help you as a mentor?
Sometimes. So sometimes. So you're exactly right. So whether you remember or I don't, the word mentor did not always was not always common vernacular in the business world, right? So that's where I mean, in somehow that came up, and I care about people, right? So I care about people. I care about connecting. There is something hardwired in me, so going back to all the positive things that came out of that growing up in Texas with this odd background, just hardwired to want to do the right thing. Right. And so whether that means you always do the right thing, but to do the right thing. And also I came up in a profession where it is all about grooming the generations below you. Right. Whatever firm, as broad as the firm is, it is a client service business. And it is a business where, there's lots of people that are involved in serving a client. And to me, in any role I ever had at PwC, the best thing I could do is make sure that other people were being groomed to take care of clients in the best possible way. So is that mentorship? Probably, right? Probably. And some of it, certainly as the years went on, may have been deliberate. And again, and I could, we could get into that debate because I was always one a bit skeptical, and probably still am, that you can assign a mentor, right? Because to me, an effective mentorship means that there is some connection. There's a connection, there's a trust, there's communication has to be easy. Is that a good way to describe it? I mean, it just needs to be, and there needs to be that comfort level. So, one of the things that has surprised me, to your point, or so indirectly answering your question, is since this book has been released, I have been stunned by the number of former colleagues that have reached out to me to say, I saw that you have done this book. And, congratulations. But the messages I've gotten about, some were like, you may not remember me, but I was working back in Dallas when you were with the firm and so, always. And then even one from a partner one day this week who is somebody, I mean, we never worked that closely together. We were always in different offices. We spent, I mean, I've met his wife, but not somebody that I had regular contact with, who sent me a note to say, one, that he found the book a page turner, which I'm still amazed, but and also to say, his comment was, he said, "I had issue with the fact that I think you were too humble because you spent a lot of time talking about what other people did for you. You spent almost no time talking about what you did for other people." And he said, "I personally saw the impact you had on men, women, and others." And that's hard for me to say even to you, Joe, because that's not, and I was stunned by what he said,
Wow,
and
that's great. It's so awesome.
touched. There's no other word to say it. It's just touched. I can't come up with a better word. I'm sure there is one. You think that somebody who's written a book could come up with a better word? I can't.
No, I like touch. It's funny to talk about mentorships, and this may sound odd in context, but I almost believe like a mentorship is almost like a romantic partner because remember the old Sex and the City line, "He's just not that into you."
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
the
yeah.
reason work relationships don't work. One person is just not that, or I'm saying in the early goings, it's just not into the other person. So in mentorship, if either person is not into each other, I mean, that's where it starts, right? I mean, obviously the mentor has the more experience, has stuff to share, but if that mentor doesn't have a connection with this person, maybe sees themselves in that younger mentee, I think that's where what happens. So I think the idea of actively searching out mentors is a good idea, but you've got to search out mentors that, in a way, you connect on more than just the higher and lower status.
I agree with you completely. And also when you say that, Joe, it makes me think too, it's hard for me to believe that anybody could ever have just one mentor, right?
Yeah.
Because different people are good at different things and, whether it be the hopefully more good mentors than bad, but well, you actually said it very well, right? That you saw different things in different people that it's like, "Oh, yes, someday when I'm in that position, that's how I wanna do that." It's like, "Oh, no, I would never, would never do that."
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, for
Let's
sure.
get into the world of consulting a little bit here because it is very mysterious. I often joke that these folks at like Deloitte and PwC and McKinsey, like no one actually knows what you guys do. There's this idea that when a company hires a consultant, it's like, oh boy, the blank's about to hit the fan. Tell us about this relationship when you go in and work with a company as a consultant. You know, is there the initial friction? Because usually leadership's all aboard because they're doing it because their board said something like, "Hey, you got to do something." They're like, "Oh, of course, I'm gonna bring consultants in here," and then it's usually the people underneath the leader that have to deal with the consultant. But tell me about that relationship between consultant and client.
Um, Complex, right?
Okay.
How's that for a starter? Complex because it's all across the board, right? I mean, so it could be that depending so there's one aspect of what a PwC, which is doing the public service, if you will, of providing independent audits for firms that they have to have, right? Your public company, you've got to have audited financial statements. But in any given year, on any given client, depending upon, what might be going on, I mean, that's complex. It's complex, it's hard. Tax services, which is where I spent a lot of my career. Some of that could be, everybody's working. There may not be the friction because both the company and the firm is brought in to help solve a problem, right? So to help solve a problem that everybody is on board that it needs to be solved. That doesn't mean it's not that it's always easy, but there can't be friction. And then certainly there's the other aspect that you bring up, which is the mysterious consulting thing where, maybe everybody at the company's not on board, right? And to me, that's what makes, it's like a client relationship. It's like any other relationship, and it's getting the right team on board, right? I mean, getting the right people, and it's the beauty of a PwC where you got, just an unbelievable number of talented people, but it's knowing, and that's where I would also say, to your point, in the mystique about is learning how to serve and being self-aware, and this is keeping on your theme of a PwC. I remember I was at some training session, and I was pretty senior partner by that time, and somebody had asked, and it's like probably as all partners and younger people, it's like, I'll say, "So get up and tell a story about when you made a mistake." Right? Because you should be able to learn from other people's mistakes. And I remember everybody else got up and told some benign, and that's the only way I can describe it, benign story about, like, I don't know what it was, like, I was 12 hours late with a deadline, even if they said that. And I remember I got up and I told the story, and it was when I was fired from a client. And that's never easy. But again, complex relationships, to your point, and maybe, and I was on this job and I was working with, I was actually the tax partner on the job. I was working with an audit partner, and I could tell that it was troubled. It was some very difficult issues. Felt like I was the one that would always have to find the way to say, "Yeah, well, no, we can't exactly do it that way," or whatever. And one day the audit partner called me. He's a great guy, and he's like, "Marianne, I don't know how to say this." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Well, the client has called and they really want you off the job." And this is not a small client. And I'm like, I said, don't, I'm so sorry you're having to do this. It's not a problem. We need to get the right person, and I'll be there in the background, right? You don't have to worry about that. I will be there. I will be invisible. But what I learned from that, Joe, is I knew it in my bones. I knew things were not going well. And in retrospect, what I would have done differently is I should have gone to my partner and said, "You know what? I can tell I'm not the right person for this job right now." Right? I am there is a tension here, there's a friction here, it's making it harder for everybody to get done what they need to get done. You need to replace me on this job. Right? And again, I'm not going to, I'm like, I am here, I will do whatever. Because then I think back of how impactful it could have been for him. Now, mind you, it all turned out okay, and in the PwC, you've got a wealth of talent, but I thought back, how great would this have been for him to go in and say, "You know what? I can tell that things are not where they should be with Marianne on this job, and you are so important that we need to get her off this job, and we need to find the right person for you," and not made the client have to come to him. So to me, and I would tell anybody that to this day, it's like, be that self-aware, and it's okay, right? It's okay, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. I don't know anybody who doesn't, and it's like, what do you do with those mistakes? How do you learn from them, and how do you go forward from it?
That's great. That's great. And your career has been pretty illustrious. You're served on several boards, and when I speak to people who are trying to build up their authority, there's two things they always strive for. One, they want to be public speakers. They want to go. They want to make a living traveling the world, giving speeches. And two is be on boards. Now, those two things are things you should want to achieve. But I think sometimes, especially in the world of business, it's like I should do that because I should do that. Not because I want to do that. It's because, oh, that's good for me. It's like, well, but when I talk to people about podcasts, like I say, why do you want to do a podcast? Well, everyone else doing a podcast, so I should do it. Or a book. Why'd you write a book? Oh, all my other colleagues are writing books, so I'm gonna write books. So tell me about, let's get into the weeds of being on a board and what it means to be part of a board and be able to have an impact on a company in a way where you're not there, day to day. But like talk about like what how important it is for you to be on a board.
I would love to, and when I after I do that, now we come back to the public speaking also. 'Cause I have one very it's like another thing that it, like, goes back to the days in Mart that affects public speaking that I had not thought about until you asked that question, but being on a board. So and Joe, I'm beginning to feel like you and I think a lot alike. So I had the privilege of serving on PwC boards, both its US I had the privilege of serving on both the PwC US board and the PwC Global board. And in doing that, I realized how much I enjoyed that aspect of business, being on the governance side. And then the last job I had with the firm. So I knew going into when I retired from PwC that I didn't want to do nothing. And I knew that I loved serving on a board. And what I love about it is that it is intellectually interesting. Right. So it is intellectually interesting in that the companies I am involved with are interesting companies. They do interesting things. I believe, because that's important to me about a board that I want to be on, is that it does good things in the world. And I believe that all the boards I'm on do that. It keeps me engaged. I like to think that it keeps me relevant. So I like to think that it keeps me relevant so that I can sit here and have this conversation with you that hopefully others will hear that talks about what you can do. But I don't have to be involved in day-to-day operations, right? So I don't have to be involved in running that company or running a division of that company on a day-to-day basis. So to me, and I get to be with interesting people and people doing good. So the CEOs of these companies are, you know, fantastic people. The other people I serve on the board with. So it is all of that, and I feel like it enables me to continue to hopefully take all these years of experience that I've had and having seen a lot of things, because your job on a board is not to run the company, right? But it is to, I believe when you're most effective is when you can ask the right questions, right? When you can ask the right questions that will help management see and to see things in maybe a little bit different way, or and to draw on again, hopefully this, these things that you've learned from being in the world for many years. And a lot of time, and it's so funny when you say it though, because I have a lot of people that will say, Marion, I think I want to be on a board. And when they ask, how do you get on the board? In all honesty, Joe, the stars have to align, right? So there has to be a board opening. Somebody has to know you're interested. You have to have the right fit. I mean, there's like a whole, you can't just say, oh, yes, I want to be on that board and go send in your application. But sometimes I've had people, I think you almost said, to be like, well, just somebody told me that's what I needed to do. And to me, if you can't tell me why you want to be on a board, then that to me isn't the greatest. You would not be on the top of my list of, okay, yeah, this is who I want sitting in the seat next to me.
Oh, that's great. That is such a I'm so glad you share that because I do feel like people have that stance of like, I gotta do it because. So I'm glad I'm not just seeing it from the outside. You're literally you're
I've
in the
seen
desert
it.
and you see it.
No, it's like one, and again, I'll say it again. I mean, I'm so proud of my heritage with PwC. I think it is such a phenomenal firm. Anybody, if they call and ask me to do something today for that firm, I'd do it in a heartbeat. And I got a call from, this is a few years ago, from a partner saying, Marion, would you mind? He's like, there's a partner I work with. She's going to be retiring soon. She thinks she wants to be on a board. Would you meet with her? And I'm like, of course I would. So we met for lunch. It was here in Manhattan. And I remember and I asked this question about why do you want to be on a board? And she's like, well, I don't know that I do, but everybody's telling me this is what I need to do. They're telling me that this is my with my background, number one, why am I retiring now? And why and my comment is, it sounds to me like they're projecting their own issues onto you, right? So, it's like, you don't know anybody those explanations, and it's okay if you want to do nothing. But but so to your point, yeah, there's a lot of that.
Wow, that's great. All right, so you mentioned you want to dig into public speaking a little bit. That's one of the things that goes hand in hand with boards. I mean, I think it's kind of starts like there's like this. Pat Riley called this innocent climb. Like you'll start with, oh, okay, I want to write a book. Then maybe we'll do some weekly blogs. I'll do a podcast, and then okay, I think my next thing is public speaking. That's I could do that, right? Everyone else is doing it. So tell me about what your take is on public speaking.
Well, my take on public speaking, and again, it takes me back to being serving on some, I don't know, focus group, something way, 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 way back then. And I was already a partner, and somebody was asking about, what is it for universities? It was like, what was the most valuable, focused on the accounting industry, consulting industry, what was the most valuable course you had at university? And they're going around the room, and I gave them my answer, and I can tell they're looking at me like this lady is crazy and she doesn't understand what we're trying to do. But I thought a minute and I said, actually, the most meaningful course I ever had was actually speech that I took at Mart High School.
Wow.
And they looked at me and I'm like, no. I said, because, and actually, it was before I even took the class, there was a teacher there. Her name was Mrs. Davis. I still remember. And when I was in junior, I somehow, and again, small school, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised. And she came to me and she's like, Marian, I think you would be good at speaking. And I want you to start entering into some of these competitions. And one of them was, I started out doing what they called informative speaking. It went on to persuasive speaking, where literally the way it was like statewide competitions, regional. You would go in. The only thing you could take with you were magazines or whatever. Remember the days of magazines. And you would draw 5 topics. From one of those 5 topics, you would pick one you wanted to present on. You had 1 hour to prepare, and then you had to stand up and give a 5-minute speech to the judges. And I did that before I ever took her speech class. So as this younger than her students person, I would go in and have to practice in front of her class. But what that did for me is I have always been comfortable in front of a group. I don't know, and I attribute it to that because at an early age, I was just like, "Okay, go in, prepare, and just get up and do it," and that served me well in my career. It served me, I mean, today, if you told me I had to get up in front of 500 people or 1,000 people and give a speech, assuming I knew something about it, and I wouldn't do it if I didn't, I am blessed with not having those terrors, but which a lot of people do. And I attribute it back to this kind of training. So,
That's great.
but that's not so when people say, "I wanna do public speaking," how many, Joe, do you think know what they're actually asking to do?
Yeah, or what they're gonna talk about. Like, yeah, okay, what's your message? Just because, there's this thing in society, and I think it's more American culture where rich and wealth equals intelligence, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. I sometimes think rich and wealth with obviously family, nepotism, but two, luck. As we all know in
Oh, totally.
entrepreneurship, the failure rate is astronomical. So those people that succeed, sure, skilled, bright, whatever, it required a piece of luck. My favorite story and the anecdote I always use, Marianne, is Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks. Amazing story. Literally changed the way we consume coffee. As a
Totally.
kid growing up, Marianne, we drank Senka, and then when we went out to dinner, we had a cup of coffee at dessert. Now, kids out of the womb are drinking cups of Starbucks, right? So when he goes to run for president, people are like, man, meh, okay, no interest. Because he made a great CEO, entrepreneur, founder, but he didn't inspire people as a presidential candidate. It's just then again, goes back to my point. Just because you're rich, successful, wealthy, 1% of the 1% does not mean that you are intelligent in some other shape or form.
I agree completely. I mean, and I would never name names, but it was, and I'm not him at all. But I remember a client way, way, way back when that, sort of this different because again, I get you. I mean, to your point, created. And I remember when it started, it's like, who's going to pay for it, right? But was one of those, as we used to laugh. It's like, okay, this is one that in the dictionary there needs to be the picture of better lucky than smart.
Yeah.
Right? Being in the right place at the right time. I mean, obviously knowing how to capitalize on it, but not with yes, so I agree with you completely. And I'd say the same thing is true even beyond is true in the arts world. It's true in the entertainment world. I mean, obviously, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that are very, very talented out there as artists, as singers, as thespians that don't ever become household names.
Right. And one thing that you were able to do, you were able to accomplish that not a lot of people have is write a book. And I always tell people when they ask me for advice on like making something, I say, my best piece of advice, do it. Just actually do the thing. And you did it with this book. And I always love to wrap these conversations up by talking about the dedication of the book. And you
Mm.
dedicate your book to my niece, Dr. Trudy Cloyd. Thank you for sharing your life and family with me. Never forget that you are amazing and I love you unconditionally more than words can express. Why was it important to dedicate the book to Trudy?
Because she is an amazing human being. You bring tears to my eyes, sorry. Trudy was one of the ones that when I was deciding to write this, I called Trudy. All right, and I said, Trudy, I'm thinking about writing a book. What do you think? And she was like, please do it for me. And she is Trudy is an emergency medicine physician at Columbia Presbyterian here in New York. So I have watched this young woman, go through medical school, go through her residency. She has a wife and two beautiful children now, but Trudy was 18 months in attending. So she left when she graduated from NYU, finished her she's chief resident at NYU, I might add, went to Columbia when COVID hit. So I got to see COVID in New York City through the eyes of this amazing woman, and she is all about giving back. She is, and again, she will always second guess herself, and that's like one of those because she's always like, "What more should I be doing? I don't know if I'm like," and I don't know that she realizes how good she is and how special she is. And in fact, when it came out, one of the things I told her, and I told her, it's like, Trudy, the only thing I know about this book is I know who I would dedicate it to. And she was like, okay, I can't even believe that. But one of the things I said to her, Joe, is, Trudy, I hope that even long after I'm gone, any day you are having a not great day, please just read that dedication, right? Just to remind yourself of who you are and that, again, I am always there for you.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing that with me. She is Mary Ann Cloyd, the author of The Audacity to Wonder, A Journey of Persistence, Resilience, Gratitude, and Love. Mary Ann, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Joe, thank you for doing this again.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you'd like to find out more about Marianne and our other authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.